Hello everybody. Today we are going to talk about short classics that you can read in a very short amount of time. These are pieces of literature that have influenced society and culture, and they're very accessible, they're fast reads, and once you're done with them, you feel accomplished. And a great one is, look how short this is, John Steinbeck of Mice and Men. And this is a whopping 107 pages. So John Steinbeck, one of the great works of American literature, takes place during the Depression. So there's two migrant workers during the Depression, and just 100 pages. A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. This is basically the story that is the basis of all the Christmas stories. So The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, it's basically Scrooge. A lot of the Christmas stories are, you have the man who just isn't in the spirit of the holiday. He is not happy about life. He's cynical, and then he has a transformation. And that's really the kernel of A Christmas Carol. And the other thing is, a lot of people don't think about it. A neat thing that's what's also really neat about Christmas Carol is it's a ghost story. So there's the ghost of the different Christmas past, present, and future. But a great work. And Ray Bradbury, the great science fiction writer, he said that if he had to keep one book of all the books in literature, it would be A Christmas Carol, because Scrooge is an example of how you can always change. And another interesting thing about Christmas Carol is Scrooge is the hero. So Scrooge becomes the hero. That's what's sort of neat about it. Robert Louis Stevenson has a number of short works. You may recognize Robert Louis Stevenson's name. He's Treasure Island. He also wrote The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And what is really neat about The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is it is a story that has it is so ubiquitous in the sort of the psyche of our culture, that whenever we meet somebody who's sort of two-faced, we call them a Jekyll and Hyde. It is, in this edition, a whopping 78 pages. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Robert Louis Stevenson's classic, it's been a meme, essentially. They didn't call them memes in the 19th century, but we run into a Jekyll and Hyde person. That is a short story, essentially, and it's always packaged. You can see it's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and selected short fiction. It's so short that they have to put it with other works. So great work there. Another slim volume that has become, almost like I said, almost like a meme, Animal Farm. So George Orwell, you might recognize George Orwell, 1984. He wrote 1984. In 1948, he switched the years around. Animal Farm. George Orwell really stuck out his neck when he wrote Animal Farm in the 40s. So World War II had just finished, and the Allies had just won the war, and because the war had such a high death toll in the Soviet Union, even though the British and the Americans and the Canadians knew that Stalin probably wasn't a good guy, World War II had just happened, and so he was still like an ally. And you didn't speak ill about Uncle Joe, as they called Joe Stalin in the United States. However, George Orwell said, the Soviet communists, they are bad guys. And he used the metaphor of animals on a farm to talk about the degradation that happens in a communist society. So, fascinating work, early critique of communism. George Orwell knew exactly, or he had a pretty good idea what was going on in the Soviet Union before most people in the West did. Another short one. And this edition is a whopping 141 pages. H.G. Wells. H.G. Wells is the classic 19th century science fiction author. This is actually two books put into one. This is The Time Machine and The Invisible Man. You might know H.G. Wells. Another one that he has, it isn't long either, but it's longer than these ones, is War of the Worlds. But The Time Machine and The Invisible Man are also entirely iconic. The Time Machine, a fascinating book about a scientist who figures out time travel and goes into the distant future. 83 pages. And The Invisible Man is a little bit longer, but hardly 110, maybe 115 pages. So you get two from H.G. Wells to choose from if you need a short classic. The Time Machine and The Invisible Man. Julius Caesar. Shakespeare. Anything Shakespeare. Shakespeare, remember, were plays. So, they have to be done in a few hours. Now the language is more challenging because it's Elizabethan, but they are shorter. I picked Julius Caesar because it just happens to be my favorite Shakespearean play, but really any of them, Romeo and Juliet, Othello, that you can read. Like I said, the language is a little bit harder than the other ones, but in terms of size, not too long. And then I have two from the Middle Ages. The first is Beowulf, and this one is a great edition because it's been translated from the Old English by Seamus Heaney. He's an amazingly accomplished Irish poet who's a great scholar. And what's neat about this is this side is the Old English and this side is Modern English. So it's actually half this length, and it's just over 100 pages. So the book itself is about 215 pages, but because one half of it is Anglo-Saxon and then the other half is Modern English, it's just over 100 pages. And Beowulf is so much fun to read. It's as far as we know, the oldest surviving piece of literature in English, and it's about a hero who fights monsters. So hey, you can't go wrong there. And then the last one I have is another medieval one, Sir Gawain or Gavin and the Green Knight. And this is a translation by Simon Armitage. This is another very good example of a medieval poem. This is later than Beowulf. This is about 400 years after Beowulf, but it's Arthurian. And this one, just like the Beowulf edition that I showed you, it has the Middle English on the one side and the contemporary English translation on the other. But this is a Arthurian poem. So it has Sir Gawain, and it starts in the court of Arthur, and it's also a Christmas time, a Yuletide affair. So it's very interesting that it's both Arthurian and it's also a Yuletide or Christmas celebration. So those are some examples of some short classics that you can read in a short amount of time. They aren't long. You'll feel accomplished about yourself. You can check them off your list of things to read, and you can go to your next dinner party and brag about it. This is Jeffrey the Librarian. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe. Love to hear from you in the comments. Have a good day. Thank you so much. Happy reading.